We're live. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, first and foremost, for joining us. This is, like I said in the start, this for me was something I would have dreamed of when I was selling, getting to see behind the buyer's curtain, so to speak, to get to meet and hear from some of the greatest champions. Certainly, Mark and Wouter, I don't know if you know this actually, Wouter. I sent you a book. Did you read the book? Don't worry if you didn't.
Of course, I did read the champion chapter, but I still need to do the rest.
But no, I'll let you off for that. You are in the book, so that you are a champion that's talked about in the book. Yeah. So that's for sure. And then of course, Mark, you are in the you're in the masterclasses where I refer to the person who was actually working as a champion for me, helping me out when the CTO, Mr. John Allen, was asking people in the room to kind of poo-poo our solution because you felt like we were winning, we were doing too much of a good job that you wouldn't be able to negotiate with us, right? Remember that? So let's do a short round of introductions. It'd be great to hear from you. I'd love, Mark, perhaps you could start by introducing yourself and how we got to know each other, the role you were doing then and what you're doing now. It'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Mark Leach. I'm the managing director of Brainlabs Manchester, which is part of the Brainlabs group, a global digital media agency. I head up the majority of the optimization team here. Prior to that, I was head of e-commerce at Misguided, which is where Andy and I originally met. If memory serves me right, Andy, I think the first time we met was in a fairly complicated meeting where there's a lot of voices in the room at the time. And I think over the years we've met a few times, and it stood out to me that you do things very differently to others. And yeah, I think we've gone from being colleagues to sponsors to friends. So it's been a really nice journey.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny, you can remember the first time you met me, but as a typical sleuthy sales guy, I met you about 5 times before you met me because I'd stalk you around at events and try and catch my moment to talk to you and all that kind of stuff. But like I said earlier, there's always be someone else that jumped in before me. So thank you. Welcome, Mark. Wouter, hello, sir. How are you? I was in your fine country this weekend watching that guy. I forget his name. Some Formula 1 driver do something. Don't want to talk about that. But how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all fine. All right. We go way back. We've crossed multiple times during the past years. I think we first met in Talpa way back. At that time, you were working for Sprinkler. And it was also a funny vendor selection process. I probably was there indeed a champion. It was not that obvious that we were in a position to buy that solution at that time. And we really pushed that internally. So I think that's really is one of the ultimate scenarios of being a champion and being successful. And at the later stage we met, I think you were working at Telium shortly. And of course there was an existing relationship, but still upselling and stuff like that. So there was still stuff going on. And today I'm running the cloud platform operations at Activideo, a company that basically sells a technology to virtualize OTT apps on set-top boxes and connected TVs.
So it's like you and Mark have both, and I guess Russ as well, you guys have both jumped from one side of the table to the other. Now you actually have salespeople in your teams, and you're working closely with fine salespeople, I'm sure.
Absolutely. So that, really short, right? Let's not go too much in detail there.
Yeah. And then Russ, last but not least, welcome, Russ. Maybe give a brief background into where you are now, but how you came into the role, because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, sure. I had a former experience in managed services out there, Capgemini, BT, Computer Center, people, I've kind of been around a little bit. But I moved out of that commercial background and spent the last 10 years working in higher education. So I had senior leadership roles in a handful of universities, director level transformation stuff. And I was responsible, obviously, for creating strategy, buying solutions, and ensuring stuff got done and things happened. Along the way, I've had a number of engagements with ANS. And they are. And I suppose I became a fan of the approach and the sort of people that I was dealing with, which is quite important to me. And I'm sure we're going to come on and talk a bit more about that. But I was responsible for making some of these big strategy projects happen, and using ANS as a partner. Eventually got talking to the business, who've been through quite a big strategic change in the last year, a bit of a merger with UK Fast. People might be aware of that, and became a bigger company. Spoke to the CEO, Paul Shannon, came in, talked about, and I've ended up working on the inside to help to build out our whole approach back into that market. So I am now responsible for ensuring that our products and solutions are very focused on higher education. So that's really my job.
Great stuff. Cool. Well, let's get stuck into it then. So we have this saying, I don't know if you guys have heard it before from your side, which is no champion, no deal. Big champion, big deal. I'm just going to throw that over to you, Wouter. I want to know, how true do you think that is? No champion, no deal. Big champion, big deal.
I think it's true. But at the same time, it's also difficult, right? Because you need to trust that champion, and I think that's where it becomes interesting, because you need that champion, but at the same time, is it an exclusive champion just for you? And I think that's probably something we want to talk a bit more detail about it. But yes, you need your champion, and of course, we talk about champions, counter champions, economic buyer, that kind of stuff. But I think, yes, you need your big champion. You need to figure out how and if it's exclusive, and to what degree you can trust your champion.
Right. Yes. I think you said that word trust quite a few times there, Wouter. You really I think maybe 3 times you said it there. And I wonder, like, when we talk about a champion, on our side, we're looking, as you know, we're looking for someone that kind of has power and influence. They have, a vested interest in our success, and they'll be selling internally for us. But you're only going to do those things if you have, as you said there, that trust. Is there a way, if there's like a scenario where we're calling you a champion, is there kind of a reverse to that? Is there sort of like a profile of a salesperson, you think, Wouter, who represents the sales champion type thing?
Yeah, I would say honestly, right? I think it's respect, it's empathy, it's really how do you get a relationship from let's say the first few seconds? How do you make sure that you connect to each other? And so the salesperson is of course very important to the process, and in the end to make that buy decision. But
amazing. Yeah. What do you think, Mark?
I think trust's quite a big word. And so I think, going in seeking trust, there's people I've known for years and I don't trust them. I wonder whether, I think you should be looking for permission first, which is, testing the boundaries of how much permission do I have in terms of, like, can I speak honestly with you? Can I ask you questions based on the internal composition of the business? You might be able to give me some discovery notes from that. And can I ask you a little bit about your position within the company as well, to understand how I present and sell better to you? And I think the results you get back from that will test how much permission you have. Trust takes too long, I think, to be talking about that as the first step.
Yeah, spot on. Russ, if there's a lot of words being used here, what's the first word that springs to mind when you think about a champion from the customer side? You think about what sort of, if you as a customer, what you're looking for in the salesperson, what's the first word that springs to mind?
It's a characteristic. It's not just about salespeople, but just about anybody from my point of view, which is about being authentic. And I think because there is it's not fair to paint the whole sales industry in the same way, but there is this perception, I think, that people can be a little duplicitous, that they have their own agenda, or they want you to do something, and it feels like there's an underhand kind of agenda going on. But I never got that personally from the guys at ANS, so as my best example of that. And so having that very personable kind of relationship with people, where trust comes from that space, which is the person I'm dealing with is authentic. They're not fake. They're not trying to pretend to be something else. And really, they are focused on what I need rather than what they want, I suppose. So authenticity is the biggest thing for me in that respect.
I love it. I love it. So it's like trust, empathy, authenticity, all of these things. There's something you said on there, but they're focused on what you need, not what they need. the thing that stands out from all of these great answers is, and again, like I probably should have said at the start, you guys have never met each other before. We didn't, have any sort of prep sessions where I fed you the question or anything like that. This is all genuine, authentic feedback we're getting here. The thing that's come across from all of your answers, not single one of those has talked about anything to do with the product or the solution or anything like that yet. You're really, really trying to get the feel from the organization, the solution provider, that they are a trusted, we talk about the trusted advisor in this. And I think that is really, really fascinating to see you guys all kind of have the same perspective, but it's almost like different ways of saying it, which is really, really interesting. So with that in mind, like what's the flip to this? What is the thing that you just wish that salespeople would stop doing? I'll ask that one too. Let's go to Mark.
Yeah, I think I've been reading something quite interesting recently about authenticity versus self-awareness. And I think there's something quite interesting in that, in terms of like somebody could be authentic in terms of being their true selves, but they could actually be a bit of a dick. So I think the self-awareness piece is what I'm really looking for, which is how much do I know about my own characteristics? How much do I know about my behaviors, and how do I adapt those to understand more about the person that I'm doing business with? And so like, I think, and that actually, that does actually breed a level of sense of authenticity within other people. So I think it's not just about being yourself. It's about how aware of you of the situation that you're in. Do you have a good grasp and understanding of, even like down to the formality of the business? If I turn up in t-shirt and shorts, is that correct? Or is it still a suit and tie kind of business? If I present in a certain manner, is that going to go down well, or is it going to appear as though I'm, not credible or professional enough? And I think so. I'm looking for someone who's really going to do their homework around how they can ensure that they've got that level of self-awareness where they know how they fit into this deal.
I love that. Yeah. Again, like all these things are kind of relating back to building that relationship, building that trust, that trusted advisor status. What do you think about this, Russ? Is there something that's, in engagements where you were on the receiving end of a salesperson, where you felt like you just wish they'd stop doing this, or you wish they'd do things differently?
Yeah, I think inevitably when you are pitching something, you want to talk about you. It's like, here's my solution, here's my thing, here's my product. And it goes back to a little bit to what I've just said about it's what matters to me. And so it's very easy, particularly in the IT and digital space, to get very product obsessed, but those are a means to an end. And staying focused on what are the business problems or the business ambitions. To me, there's only two things in life, which is, it's one of those: I've either got a problem or I've got an ambition. And we need to, it's kind of the whole golden thread discussion is staying true to what are the most important things here that I need to stay focused on. So being a lot less product and feature benefit obsessed, and more, how is that going to get me to the place that I need, either to build my credibility internally, to develop the business, to ensure that we're delivering on our objectives. That's the most important thing for me. And I for a long time, lots of engagements, didn't always see that, definitely.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. What do you think, Wouter? Is there something that you just wish that salespeople would stop doing?
Well, we were already talking about, I would say, in having a relationship or being further down in the process of selling. I would start with how do you get that first impression right? I could go in the joke side where people still have let's say the first introduction video calls without having their camera working right. So that's really the easy stupid stuff, and I just want to call it out because people do it. The other thing is that they still think that it's like reaching out in a cold manner on emails or LinkedIn. And I would even say people on the call today or on the event, they did it after we announced being on this panel, right? They know what we're doing, where we are, and they just reach out and want to do something. But I would say it's that following the script of the sales cycle, right? It relates to being authentic. It relates about the trust and honesty and how do you do business together. I think that's what sales people should stop doing, right? It's not just a one-way conversation. It's really doing it together to achieve something. I think that's super important.
Yeah. I'm going to bring something that I love that Russ said, and something you mentioned earlier about it together there, which is Russ was talking about basically how we would describe it from a medic perspective of aligning the salesperson's interest with the champion's goals, or what the champion's trying to achieve. And Russ, you articulated it very well. You talked about whether it's for the organization, whether it's for your own personal self, whether that be professional, of like getting a promotion, a bonus, or maybe it's just going to release workload from you so you can get home earlier in the day. And we like to talk about those things as sort of being your vested interest and aligning with those. And then bring in parallel with something you mentioned earlier about where you talked about the deal that we first had together, where you said like you weren't even sure if there really was a deal to be had there. It was quite early days for the proposition we were putting together, and it really needed you and some people in your team to kind of really get behind it. What is some advice you can give? I'll go to Mark on this one. Mark, what would be some advice you could give for when a salesperson feels like they have a very, very strong proposition and they feel like they found you as the perfect person? They're just convinced that if they get a chance to show you the value they can provide to you, what is the advice you would give to that person to be able to enable you to do what you need to do to bring in those other stakeholders that we know are so important in the size of organization that we sell to? What are some tips you could give to kind of first and foremost win you over so that you feel comfortable and trusting to introduce more people into the conversation?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. It's something I now face into as well within my role, because the service I'm now selling, there's very, very often there's no budget for it. So you're not only creating the opportunity to talk about the proposition, but you're then having to understand, well, how is this going to be funded? And what stakeholders do I need in place to make this work? I think it's probably first off about understanding your champion in terms of the route in versus understanding your champion to then do the deal. And it could be very different people. I've had experiences where my CEO has been sent, something interesting, sends it on to me, asks me to investigate, and it's gone two different ways. Sometimes you think, well, no, I'm not doing that. You've gone over my head. You've interrupted my work day, and you've just overpromised a load of shit that I don't really want to have to sweep up. But I've had other experiences where I'm like, this looks legit. This is good. The fact that I've already got somebody engaged means that, if I think it's a good idea, I might actually be able to get some traction. And by the way, I've got some budget. I'm looking for something to invest into return. So I think it's probably about figuring out, first of all, who's your route in, and not necessarily then saying, right, I'm now going to depend on you from now on to do this. It could be just a route in terms of exploration. I think, Andy, you've called it like a land and expand previously. It's that who's my person to help me land, and just focus on that as an initial objective, rather than trying to railroad it in, where that person might not be the right champion in the long term.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you kind of breaking down this idea of kind of finding a champion to kind of bring you in, and maybe, whether there's a transaction there or not, you're kind of bringing that, you're winning that person's trust over. So they're kind of almost passing you on to the person who can take you, as you said, to the next part of the deal. I really like that. It's not something from our side, that's not something I hear people talk about very much. It's almost like having a sort of a handoff between champions, which is really interesting. I like how you said that. What do you think there, Russ? What's your perspective on, you're obviously seeing both sides of the table here now. How come a salesperson win you over? The best way of describing it, that you just like, I need to show this to more people. You need to come with me around the office. I just need to show them what you do.
There is, when we're talking about universities and higher education and the bigger deals, right? There's levels to every organization as well. So this is just something, and there's difficult and can be very challenging conversations that you have internally, depending on which group you're talking to. So, for example, if you're talking to a finance team about the need to move from a capital to a revenue model to support an on-premise infrastructure to cloud, I haven't necessarily, I might be your champion, but I haven't necessarily got all the right language and skills for all of that. So, and then you've got your exec relationships right at the top of the pile. So if you're talking about, you know, £1 million plus deals, then I might be your champion, but they may not even completely trust me internally to have that right. So having somebody else available who can come in and pitch in at a different level, I think is also important. And that puts a lot of pressure, particularly on a smaller business, because you might have an ever decreasing circle of people available who can do those executive conversations. But I still think it can play a very important part in sort of cementing that we're taking this very seriously. You know, I've got a finance person can talk to finance. I've got a CEO that might come and talk to my vice chancellor, and who is going to they're going to feel more comfortable to peer with people like that. So these sort of arrangements, I think, shouldn't be forgotten, and be flexible, and be just open to the idea that those should probably could be needed as well.
Sounds like you might need some sort of MEDDIC operating system that has stakeholder mapping built into it. Just saying. But side, this actually, we're talking about this from a sort of almost an informal perspective of kind of broadening out our engagements across an organization. But Wouter, I know at Talpa, when you're in your role there, you bought. I hate to think about how many different solutions you put through a procurement process and purchasing process. So as much as we're talking about this from an informal perspective, I'd love to get your perspective of, you know, did you have what we would call a decision process, a formal decision process? Did you create one? What did that look like, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, I would say don't tell the magic, right? But it's true. we did really, I think, over 50 vendor selection in roughly 2 years, right? So really, we did it quickly, fast, but still at a slow pace each. And yes, of course, when you do that and you do it at that pace, you need to have structure. At the same time, it's also true that you can't say it as in terms of structure. So I prefer to talk in a way of, let's say, a stage gate process. You need to hit certain milestones to get to the next phase and take it from there. And I think the magic that happens there is that you need to play it in such a way that everybody involved in the process is clear about that. So if you don't set that expectation up front, most likely a salesperson will get impatient because if he doesn't understand, he doesn't know what comes next, and he doesn't know where the end goal is. So I think it's super important that you share that type of details. And I think at that time that we've done the deals together, we already shared, for example, the number of people that were in play, so that you know where you are, where you're ranked. And of course, not by exact numbers, but where you are and likability that you will be in the last stage. At the same time, it doesn't mean, and that's going back to trust, doesn't mean you're 100% transparent. You are as transparent as possible on the need to know basis, of course. And it also means if you guys talk to a champion, I would say be careful, because I personally don't really believe in a counter champion. So the question is a champion exclusive to you? Because from my point of view, you should always have your second best solution. You need to be able to play to lose. And I think, Andy, you can really reflect to that kind of storytelling. So it's super important that people take that into account when they go into this process from a sales perspective.
Just to supplement that a little bit, I talked about with the internal team where I am now about having a champion elect, because people can always leave and just go, suddenly they got another job and the whole thing's falling apart. So having somebody that you think is waiting in the wings, I think, is quite important, who you can also, so it's like, don't put all your energy into one person necessarily. That can be a bit risky sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I want to dig into the what you said there a second ago, Wouter, because that really caught my attention about having that second option that's like always a fallback. Because, you know, being on, even if you have a great champion, let's call it a 10 out of 10 champion, being on the you know, the champion, as much as they have your interests and they may, you know, see you as the best solution for them, they also have their company's interest first and foremost. That's always going to come first, particularly if there's budgets assigned or they're just trying to get the best deal. And so you have this scenario where, like you said there, Wouter, you would have a second best option And one of the things I loved about working with you was you were very open and honest about that. And you kind of said, this is where you're strong. But in our case, it was, commercially we were weak, because I think that the second option had a very, very compelling offer on the table. And so I genuinely felt like, this could go either way. But what's the tip, zooming out from our opportunities, but just generally when you're thinking about it, what's the thing that the salesperson can do that means that it's just going to make, in that case where the commercial amount is higher, or the commitment is longer, or whatever the commercial offer looks like, is not seen as favorable as your second option, but obviously there's something in that's making it your preferred option. What is it that salespeople can do to really help you in that situation to make sure that they win the deal?
That's going to be a tough question, because in the end, it's not just a champion being the decision maker. Hopefully,
Right.
the champion is part of, let's say, the economic buyer group. That means that you have enough insight about where you are and if it's good enough to start the negotiations. Funny about the previous mention about you need to add 15% before you go to procurement, because they need to get the 50% discount, right? I try to play the other way around. Make sure that people are priced right, not to win procurement, but in the end, if I'm part of that team, most likely I'm also the budget holder in the end, but without stating that or make that public known. So I think that's super important. It's most of the time in the end, of course, financial is super important. That's where it ends. But it starts first with having the right solution to solve, as Russ stated, either a problem or it serves the need for the long-term or short-term ambitions of the company, of the person.
Love that. I'm going to go to you, Mark, because what my opening comment was that at some point, and we used to joke about this, but I remember you used to show me your inbox, and it was just like, it was like SDRs Anonymous in your inbox when you were at Misguided, because I think you were getting like 30 or something messages a day from people trying to get your attention. But sometimes they broke through. I think that's how we first initially got to talk to each other. You capture the person's attention. So what I'd love to know, what is it, when we talk about the decision process in Medic, we talk about it not just being like when there's an actual opportunity, like, okay, we're going to evaluate this and therefore the decision process has begun. The way we think about it is actually that decision process goes all the way back to the first engagements, because what we're trying to first and foremost do is transform what is a spark of interest, what is something that's maybe caught your attention, into being having the criteria which would be considered as an evaluation, so that we know that if we're going to come and bring thought leadership, value, all great stuff to the table for you, showing you what value we can bring to you, that actually this is going to have the potential to go somewhere if you deem that there's enough value in taking it forward. So what's the things, just going a bit before that, what are the things that that you can remember from, and I know there's some great, I know that Charles at Optimizely was someone that really caught your attention as well. I'd love to hear that, some like anecdotes or stories or things that stand out to you as the person that early on just managed to make you go, yeah, I'm actually prepared to kind of put my arm around this person and kind of take this opportunity, this solution around the business.
Yeah, well, if I think of like the people, like there's Charlie at Optimizely, yourself, Chris Neenan, who was at Bazaar Voice at the time. I think of the characteristics of those deals. I think you all showed a genuine interest in the business that I was working for at the time. And that always came first. I think early on, you also all focused on the problem I was trying to solve, rather than jumping to, here's what we have, here's how it works, isn't it great? And so there's a combination of those. Look, there is some luck involved in this, just being right place, right time. There is just some good fortune there, but you have to be there to be able to be in the game. So if we kind of exclude some of the good fortune, I think it is those main two things really. So showing an empathy and an understanding of the business itself, and then really focusing on the problem that you're aiming to solve, and that's kind of the root of where it starts. And then, from there, where you go, obviously depends on the size, the scale of the deal, the type of product that it is you're talking about. But I think something interesting along the lines of what we were saying before about the champions, it's also thinking about like, who else do I need to involve in this? So, that's something you asked me early on, and that Charlie and Chris also asked, which was Like, who else do we need to include in this? And, you know, asking yourself that really tough question of like, who do you really not want in the room? Who's going to be against this entirely? Who's going to say it's a terrible idea? Who's going to be really obstructive in this deal? And let's get them in early on, because if they're not, you know, you've essentially then got a problem that's going to be a problem at some point.
I love that. So you're suggesting there that you should bring the detractors in, the ones that, you know, the people are going to cause a bit of trouble later on, get them in and get them involved early on.
Yeah, 100%.
Wow. I like that. Yeah. It's almost like, you know, it's like it's playing a computer game. You're kind of getting the boss level in earlier on, get past then the rest of the levels easy, right? That's kind of maybe how I think.
Now you're assuming that the boss is the issue, Andy. Not sure that.
Yeah. Well, like Wouter, you know, particularly when the boss in this context pretends that they can't speak English when you're trying to negotiate with them, and you're pretending to negotiate with them, and you know, I still have the sleepless nights when I try and think about that one. But that boss, by the way, is a really good topic for us to dig into. In MEDDIC, it's the economic buyer, and we typically define this person as being not necessarily the person who owns the budget, or you know, that it kind of is really involved. It's actually who is the higher authority. So they're kind of the person who probably set the budget in the first place. So it might be, for example, marketing's budget, but it came from somebody a level up from them. And it's the person that kind of has that overall veto power. They can say no and say yes, and yes, and say no. We find in sales that we see in the data that when you're engaged with this person, not only do the success rates go through the roof, but so does the acceleration of the projects that you're working on. So this is a really, really difficult thing for salespeople to do for many of the reasons you've talked about there. You know, Mark mentioned around going around someone, around, you know, sort of maybe losing trust with your champion because they're seeing that you're sort of evading from them. So I'd love to get your advice from each of you of like, what's the tip if you recognize in your organization there is one person, let's call them the economic buyer, who is going to have to give their, you know, be involved, and they're going to have to give their approval for this. What's your advice for a salesperson where you see yourself as a champion, and to them, what's your advice for them in that example? Russ, I'll start with you, please. What's your thoughts there?
Oh, that's tricky, isn't it? I mean, it is it's getting them involved, I suppose, in solving the problem. And so, because there's this platform, I suppose, that they stand on, where it's like, oh, well, I'm the gatekeeper. I've got the money. It's a little bit like that, and procurement do play a part in that, and oh no, they want to go down that rabbit hole where I know they come out of left field. They suddenly start coming up with new and interesting ways of evaluating things, and oh, we want this requirement and that, and it starts to detract from the whole thing. It's very frustrating. So it's about being upfront with them, being very clear about your objectives, taking them to one side, taking them all the way through a strategy. Sometimes I've had to do all of this so that because I've had these problems where it gets into a technical thing that you are trying to procure. They don't understand what it is sometimes, and it isn't even about the thing. It's about what is it going to do for the organization. So I think trying to ensure that you're keeping it on the level, keeping it real, making sure they're bought into that. You know, there are other people that agree with this. This isn't a thing that I'm buying. This is for our greater good. You've got to do that whole piece. That's not always easy when you're dealing perhaps with a group as well. So I've done that with procurement. I've done that with finance. I talked about finance being another group where ultimately, if they're helping to set the budget over here and they're not buying into it, they're out, and you're going to have a big problem. So
yeah. So the takeaway I get there is it's, you know, you're almost choosing every scenario individually, and you're kind of having to step back and evaluate, how can I, you know, best engage here and overcome this challenge. Same question back to you there, Mark. We've got 2 minutes left. So when you're thinking sounds like a great solution, I need to get this person involved, you know, in our case, I think it started out being Nitin actually was the CEO of the company. So how do you then, you know, when you've got so many possibilities of improving what you're doing day to day, how do you pick the ones that you're going to take to that person? And then how do you brief that person? How do you introduce the idea of them spending some investing in a new solution?
Well, I think the way you can help your champion at first is just don't overpromise. don't go in there with the ridiculous numbers, whether it's based on ROI or the fact that, we'll beat anyone on price or anything like that. Just be really careful of the over promises, because you're essentially bringing your champion into that over promise, and they're the person who's going to have to live or die by that deal within that business itself. And I think the second thing is, like, as salespeople, use your teams. So if there's a negotiation to be done, don't feel you have to do it yourself. If you're lucky enough to work within a business where you've either got, a lead on business dev or a finance person or a legal person, use them. Let them be the bad news bringers. And, I think the best salespeople I've ever worked with or championed are those who just know who to bring into the room and when. So just utilize the team that you've got. Don't feel like you always have to be the point person.
I love that. That's brilliant. And the same question to you, Wouter.
Yes. So I think the champion should, and it's maybe going into a question that somebody asked on the chat, is if a champion identifies himself, he should be able to ask for the right advice from the salesperson. The salesperson should be able to do it the other way around. And if you early on engage the other, let's say, internal stakeholders, that should also bring in, let's say, some sort of authority to that champion to run with it and bring it back home. So in my how do you say that? The champion should be the trusted advisor and take it from there all the way down or bring it home. And that salesperson should be, I would say, in lockstep with that person to make that happen.
I think we just got ourselves a quote. Wouter, I don't think I could have said that better myself. I thought that was absolutely sensational. And in fact, all the way through the session there, I was thinking, God, I'm so glad this is being recorded, because otherwise I'd be feeling like I need to reach for my notepad to kind of make notes of all of these great takeaways. Guys, that was absolutely incredible. I wish I could see the chat, because I think, like, if it was me in there, I'll be going, oh my God, this is this free? Is this session free? I'm getting all this great information for free. So thank you guys so much. You are true champions of MEDDIC and true champions of mine. So I really appreciate you giving up so much of your time today to join us and to benefit us in this session. Thank you so much.
Great fun, Andy.
Yeah, thanks.
Guys.
Cheers.
Thanks.